Welcome, curious minds. You've definitely heard the buzzwords cryptocurrency, blockchain. They're everywhere, right? In the news, online, maybe even feeling a bit overwhelming with all the tech talk.
Yeah, it's a space that can seem pretty complex from the outside. Lots of jargon.
Exactly. So in this explainer from the Crypto Visionary Network, we want to cut through some of that noise. Our goal today is simple: demystify digital assets. We'll start with the absolute basics, then, get into some of the more fascinating technical bits you might not know.
Think of it as your shortcut to really understanding what's going on with crypto.
Perfect. Now, just a quick but really important note before we jump in. The information we're sharing today, it's been put together from various internet sources, and we've used AI to help organize it all.
Uh-huh. Which means, while we're aiming for accuracy, mistakes and misinformation can sometimes creep in. It happens.
Absolutely. So nothing we discuss here should be taken as financial advice. It's purely for educational purposes. We always encourage you to do your own research, use your common sense.
Definitely. Always DYOR, do your own research.
Right. With that said, let's unpack this.
As it is.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning, reframing maybe what some people think they know. At its heart, what actually is cryptocurrency? What makes it so different from, say, the pounds or dollars in my bank account?
Well, fundamentally, it is a digital form of money, yes. But the real game changer, it's decentralization. Imagine like a special kind of digital record book.
Okay.
But instead of one single copy held by a bank, there are millions of identical copies scattered across computers, literally all over the world. Every transaction is a new line item in this book.
Millions of copies. Wow.
Yeah, and because there are so many, and they're constantly being checked against each other, it makes it incredibly difficult, almost impossible, to cheat the system or create fake money.
So the security comes from everyone having a copy.
In essence, yes. And this digital money is protected by really strong encryption. Plus, unlike your typical currency, there's no single bank or government pulling the strings controlling it.
That's the bit that always grabs attention, isn't it? No central bank, no government. But then if it's not backed by, like, a national reserve or something, what gives it value? Where does the value come from?
That's a great question. Its value isn't tied to a government promise. It's more about its usefulness, its utility, and how many people actually adopt it and use it. Think of it like a network effect.
The more people use it, the more valuable it becomes.
Kind of, yeah. The more useful people find it for sending money, maybe storing value long-term, or even building new applications on top of it, the more its value tends to grow.
Yeah.
And scarcity is also a massive factor.
Scarcity, like with gold.
Exactly, like digital gold. Bitcoin is the classic example. There's a hard limit, a fixed cap of only 21 million Bitcoin that can ever be created. Ever.
Wow, okay.
So that built-in scarcity, combined with its growing usefulness, is a huge driver of its perceived value.
Got it. And this record book you mentioned earlier, the one with millions of copies, that the blockchain?
Precisely. The blockchain is that record book. It's a decentralized, distributed digital ledger. Think of blocks as like pages in the book. Each block is a bundle of confirmed transactions.
Okay, pages of transactions.
And these blocks, these pages, are linked together securely, one after the other, in a chronological chain. And they use cryptography, complex math, to link them.
Hence the chain part.
Exactly. And what's really revolutionary about this chain is something called immutability. Once a record, a transaction, is added to a block, and that block gets added to the chain, it's practically impossible to change it.
You can't just go back and erase something.
Nope. Not without changing every single block that comes after it, which would require an unbelievable amount of computing power and coordination. It creates this amazing level of security and, crucially, transparency. Everyone can see the ledger, but no single person can easily tamper with it.
So incredibly secure, transparent, and tamper-proof. And didn't this tech solve a big problem early digital money ideas had? Something about double spending.
Absolutely. The double spending problem. Blockchain nails that. It guarantees that each unit of digital value, each coin, let's say, is transferred only once. It stops someone from spending the same digital dollar twice.
Which is obviously critical for any currency.
Essential.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is, while it all kicked off with Bitcoin for digital money, the underlying blockchain technology, its potential goes way, way beyond just currencies now. People are using it for everything from tracking goods around the world to managing digital identities.
Okay, so if I have some crypto, how does my transaction actually get onto this super secure blockchain ledger? And maybe more basically, where do I keep my crypto?
Good question. So when you make a transaction, say, sending some crypto to a friend, That transaction gets grouped together with a bunch of others into a potential new block.
Like waiting to be put on the next page of the record book.
Exactly. Then, special participants in the network, you often hear them called miners or sometimes validators. Depending on the system, they verify all these transactions. They check everything is legitimate. Once verified, they add this new block to the existing chain. That process is what secures the whole network. As for where you keep it, you use something called a wallet.
A digital wallet.
Pretty much. And you've got two main choices. One is a non-custodial wallet.
Yeah.
That might be an app on your phone or computer. With this, you hold the keys. You have sole responsibility for keeping it secure.
Total control, total responsibility.
Correct. The other option is using a third-party custodian. Think of it like a specialized digital bank for crypto. They manage the security for you, but you're trusting them with their assets.
Right. And if you go the first route, the non-custodial wallet, holding your own keys,
Yeah.
that brings us to the famous, or maybe infamous, seed phrase, doesn't it? How vital is it that people understand this?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. Probably the single most important thing to grasp if you're managing your own crypto. Your seed phrase, sometimes called a recovery phrase, is usually a random list of 12 or 24 words.
Just ordinary words.
Seemingly ordinary words, yes, but in a specific order. This phrase is basically the master key to your entire digital vault, and I cannot stress this enough. Never, ever, ever give your seed phrase to anyone.
Never?
Never. Don't store it digitally where it could be hacked. Don't email it, nothing. If someone gets hold of your seed phrase, they have complete, irreversible access to all your funds. Gone.
And if you lose it yourself?
You lose it, you might lose access forever. There's no customer support line to call to reset your password. It is ultimate responsibility, but as you said, also ultimate control.
That's a really powerful point about self-custody. Okay, moving on slightly. There are thousands of cryptocurrencies now. Are there common types we should know about? What are their main jobs?
Yeah, it's a huge ecosystem. But you can broadly group them.
Yeah.
You have payment tokens, like Bitcoin itself, primarily designed for, well, payments and transactions.
Makes sense.
Then you have utility tokens. These are interesting. They usually grant you access to a specific service or application that's built on a blockchain, like a digital key or token for a particular platform.
Okay, so they do something specific within a system.
Exactly. And then a really important category,
Yeah.
stablecoins. These are designed to minimize the price swings, the volatility you often see with crypto. They do this by trying to peg their value, usually one-to-one, to a traditional currency.
Like the US dollar.
The US dollar is the most common peg, yeah. Think of coins like Tether, USDT, or USD coin, USDC.
Yeah.
They aim to always be worth $1. They're really useful for traders, providing stability and making it easier to move in and out of other cryptos.
But haven't some stable coins, well, failed to stay stable?
Yes, that's a crucial caveat. While many have held their pegs successfully for years, it's not guaranteed. The most infamous example is probably Terra's UST, which dramatically collapsed in May 2022, falling from $1 down to just pennies. So due diligence is still vital, even with stablecoins.
Right, so stable isn't always perfectly stable. Good reminder. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, right? The meme coins.
Ah, yes, meme coins. These are, well, exactly what they sound like.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrencies that often start as internet jokes or memes. Dogecoin is the classic example, starting from a Shiba Inu dog meme.
I remember that one.
They're known for extreme volatility, often driven purely by social media hype or celebrity mentions, rather than any real underlying technology or utility. It's a very speculative corner of the market.
So definitely a case of buyer beware.
Absolutely. That principle applies strongly there. Meme coins are also, unfortunately, frequently associated with scams and schemes like rug pulls.
Okay, good to know. So we have all these types, this underlying tech. Stepping back, what is crypto and blockchain actually good for? What are the real-world benefits beyond the headlines and the trading?
There are some really compelling advantages. First, that independence we talked about, operating without needing a central bank or government. That gives users unrestricted access to their funds and full responsibility. That can be incredibly powerful, especially in places with unstable economies or strict capital controls.
Financial sovereignty,
Yep.
essentially.
You could call it that. Then there's accessibility. All you really need is an internet connection and a crypto wallet. You don't necessarily need a traditional bank account. This has huge potential for financial inclusion, bringing financial services to people who are currently unbanked.
That's a massive potential impact. What about just everyday transactions? Is it better than using a bank?
It can be. Efficiency is a big plus. Crypto transactions can have lower fees, especially for international transfers, and they can be much faster. We're talking minutes, potentially. compared to days for some traditional international bank wires.
Minutes versus days is a big difference.
Huge. But remember, the applications go way beyond just finance now. Blockchain tech itself is being used to improve security for personal identity, making things like logistics more transparent. The shipping giant Maersk uses it to track containers globally.
Wow.
It's improving healthcare data management companies like BurstIQ use it for securely managing health info. Even governments are exploring it for streamlining services. The potential impact across different industries is genuinely transformative.
That really paints a picture of broad utility. Okay, we've got a solid foundation now. Let's peel back another layer maybe, dive into some of the more technical stuff, the nuances that really define how this all works under the hood.
Sounds good. Where should we start? How about a little history nugget? The word blockchain itself.
Oh yeah, what about it?
Well, it's interesting because Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious creator of Bitcoin, didn't actually use blockchain as one word in the original white paper. Block and chain were used separately.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't until maybe around 2016 that the combined term blockchain really caught on and became the standard way to refer to the technology. Shows how the language evolves with the tech.
Huh. And thinking about that ledger again, the sheer size of these blockchains must be enormous now, right? All those transactions piling up.
Oh, they're massive and constantly growing. Take the Bitcoin blockchain. Back in August 2014, it was around 20 gigabytes. By early 2020, it had ballooned to over 200 gigabytes.
200 gigs just for transaction records.
Yep. Containing the entire history of all Bitcoin network transactions. It's a testament to the distributed nature, but yeah, it definitely poses an ongoing data storage challenge for people who want to run a full copy of the ledger, a full node.
Right. Okay, let's zoom in even closer. Inside one of those blocks, it's not just a simple list of who sent what to whom, is it?
No, not at all. Each block has more structure. It starts with a really important piece of data called the block header. Think of the header as the block's unique ID card or fingerprint.
What's in this header?
Crucial stuff. There's a version number telling you what rules the block follows. There's the hash of the previous block, that's the cryptographic link that forms the chain. There's a timestamp showing when the block was created. And then two key technical bits, a difficulty target and a nonce.
Okay, difficulty target and nonce. We'll probably come back to those with mining. But you missed one I saw in the notes, a Merkle root hash. Sounds complicated.
Ah, yes, the Merkle root. It's actually a really clever piece of cryptography. A Merkle tree is basically a way to efficiently summarize all the individual transactions within that block using hashing.
So it squishes down all the transaction info?
Into a single unique hash, the Merkle root, which sits in the block header. The genius of it is, it allows for incredibly fast verification of the block's integrity. If even one tiny detail in one transaction within that block was changed, the final Merkle root hash would completely change.
So you don't have to check every single transaction to see if the block's been tampered with?
Exactly. You just check the Merkle root. It's a super efficient way to ensure data integrity.
That is clever. And it neatly brings us to the broader power of cryptography that makes all of this possible. How do these cryptographic functions secure everything?
Right. There are two fundamental cryptographic pillars here. First, you have cryptographic hash functions, like SHA-256, which Bitcoin uses. This algorithm takes any input data, could be tiny, could be huge, and squishes it down into a fixed-size string of letters and numbers, the hash.
A digital fingerprint, basically.
A unique digital fingerprint.
Yeah.
And crucially, it's a one-way street. You can't take the hash and figure out the original data. Impossible. Also, even the tiniest change to the input changing one comma in a novel results in a completely different hash. That property is vital for verifying that data hasn't been messed with anywhere on the network.
Okay, so hashing proves data integrity. What about proving who sent a transaction, authenticating it?
That's where the second pillar comes in.
Yeah.
Asymmetric cryptography, also known as public key cryptography, and digital signatures. When you set up a crypto wallet, you generate a unique key pair.
Public key, private key.
Exactly. Your public key is like your bank account number. You can share it publicly for people to send you crypto. Your private key is like your secret password or PIN.
Yeah.
You keep it absolutely secret. To send crypto, you create a transaction message, and then you sign it using your private key. This creates a unique digital signature. Anyone else can then take the transaction message, your public key, and the signature, and mathematically verify that, yes, this transaction could only have been authorized by someone holding the corresponding private key and that the message hasn't been altered since it was signed.
So it proves ownership and authenticity without needing a bank or middleman to vouch for you.
Precisely. It replaces trusted institutions with mathematical proof.
Okay, that's how the transactions are secured and authenticated. Now, how do they actually get confirmed and added to that blockchain? This is where mining and consensus come in, right?
Yes, blockchains need a way for all the participants to agree on which transactions are valid and what the current state of the ledger is. This agreement mechanism is called a consensus protocol. Bitcoin's famous one is proof of work. How?
Proof of work, that's the mining part.
That's the mining part. In PoW, specialized computers, run by miners, are all competing against each other. They're trying to solve a very difficult mathematical puzzle.
What kind of puzzle?
They're essentially trying to find a specific number called a nonce that stands for a number used once. They take the data from the potential new block, add this nonce, and hash it all together using something like SHA 256.
Okay.
Their goal is to find a nonce that makes the resulting hash value fall below a certain target number, known as the difficulty target. Finding this specific nonce is incredibly hard. It's pure trial and error, brute force guessing.
How many guesses are we talking?
Trillions upon trillions of guesses every single second across the entire network. It's a massive computational lottery. The first miner to find a valid nonce that produces the right kind of hash gets to add their block to the chain and claims the reward.
Trillions per second. That sounds like it uses a lot of electricity.
It absolutely does. That's the main criticism of proof of work. It requires highly specialized, power-hungry hardware GPUs or even custom chips called ASICs and consumes vast amounts of electricity. Miners are rewarded with newly minted coins, like new Bitcoin, plus transaction fees from the block they added. That's the incentive for doing all this energy-intensive work to secure the network.
So the high energy cost is almost a feature to make attacking the network expensive.
That's one way to look at it, yes. The costliness of PoW is what makes the Bitcoin network so secure, but it definitely leads to what economists call a welfare loss due to the energy consumption. Estimates back in 2018 put Bitcoin's annual mining cost around $360 million just in electricity.
Wow. Which naturally leads to the question, are there alternatives that aren't so energy hungry?
Yes, definitely. The most prominent alternative is proof of stake,
Oh.
US. This is the consensus mechanism that Ethereum, the second biggest cryptocurrency, switched to.
How does proof of stake work differently?
Instead of miners competing with computing power, in PES, users known as validators lock up or stake their own cryptocurrency as collateral. The network then randomly chooses one validator to propose the next block.
So no massive puzzle-solving competition.
Yep. The security comes from the fact that validators have their own money on the line. If they try to cheat, they could lose their stake coins. And the energy consumption, it's dramatically lower.
How much lower?
Orders of magnitude lower. POS blockchains typically consume energy on the scale of maybe a large housing estate, whereas a major PoW chain like Bitcoin can consume as much electricity as a medium-sized country. It's a huge difference. Some coins, like XRP, are noted as being particularly efficient, using tiny fractions of a kilowatt hour per transaction.
That's a massive shift in environmental impact. It seems like POS is gaining traction then.
It is, largely because of the energy concerns around PoW.
Okay, going back to PoW for a second. With that intense competition, how does an individual person with just one computer even stand a chance of mining a block?
Realistically, they don't anymore, not on major chains like Bitcoin. That's why mining pools emerged. Individual miners pool their computational resources together.
Safety in numbers.
Exactly. They all work together to find blocks, and when the pool successfully mines one, the reward is shared amongst all the participants, proportional to the amount of computing power they contributed. It makes earnings more predictable for smaller miners.
But doesn't that concentrate power in the hands of these large pool operators?
That is a valid concern, yes. While pools help individuals, they do introduce a layer of centralization, which is something the community keeps a close eye on.
Okay, let's clear up some more jargon people might hear. What about forks? Is that like a split in the road for the blockchain?
That's a pretty good analogy. A fork happens when there's a change to the blockchain's underlying rules, its protocol. There are two main types. A hard fork is a major, non-backward compatible change, meaning everyone using the network must upgrade to the new rules. If some don't, the blockchain can permanently split into two separate chains running different versions of the software. The famous example is when Ethereum and Ethereum Classic split back in 2016 after a major disagreement.
Okay, so a hard fork can create two different coins. What's the other type?
A soft fork. This is a backward compatible change Think of it like a software update where older versions can still interact with the network, even if they don't get all the new features. Soft forks are generally less disruptive.
Got it. And another term, especially with Ethereum, gas. Are we filling up a tank?
Yeah, not quite. Gas is the term used for the fee required to conduct a transaction or execute a smart contract on the Ethereum network. It's usually paid in Ether, ETH, Ethereum's native currency.
Why the fee?
It serves two purposes. One, it compensates the validators for the computational work they do processing transactions. Two, it acts as a deterrent against spamming the network with useless transactions or running deliberately inefficient code because every operation costs gas.
Makes sense. And one more technical term from the Bitcoin world, UTXO.
UTXO stands for Unspent Transaction Output. It's a core part of how Bitcoin manages transactions. Think of it like the digital equivalent of getting change back after paying cash. When you receive Bitcoin, it comes as a UTXO. When you spend it, you consume that UTXO and might create new ones, one for the recipient and maybe one back to you as change. It's an accounting method that helps prevent double spending.
Okay, interesting detail. Now, we've mostly talked about public blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum where anyone can join, but you hear about private or permissioned blockchains too. Isn't that kind of contradictory to the whole decentralization idea?
It is, and that's a really active debate in the space. Public, permissionless blockchains are the ones most people think of open networks, supported by participants who are often incentivized with tokens. Anyone can join, anyone can transact, anyone can validate, in theory.
The Wild West, maybe.
Sometimes feels like it. Private or permissioned blockchains are different. They're typically used by specific organizations or a consortium of businesses. Access is restricted. You need permission to join and participate.
Why would a company want that?
For things like security, privacy, and control, while still getting some blockchain benefits like transparency among permitted parties and tamper resistance, they often don't need full decentralization or a public token. We mentioned Maersk using one for supply chains earlier.
Right, tracking containers.
Yeah, or think about Boeing exploring it for air traffic control data, Honeywell for aircraft parts records, or Signature Bank, which used a private version of Ethereum for instant payments between its clients. They want the ledger benefits without opening it up to the whole world.
But the critics say.
Critics argue that because verification is often handled by a central entity or a small group in these private systems, they start to look a lot more like traditional shared databases, with some cryptographic features bolted on. They question whether they truly embody the core principles of blockchain, especially decentralization. So, yeah, the debate continues whether they should even be called blockchains.
Fascinating tension between the pure ideal and practical business needs. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground on what crypto and blockchain are and can be. To give a balanced view, we absolutely have to talk about what they're not good for, or maybe more accurately, the significant risks and challenges involved.
Absolutely crucial. Because, let's be honest, the crypto space, while innovative, is unfortunately also rife with scams.
What are the big ones people should watch out for?
Well, a major issue, especially in the decentralized finance or DeFi space, has been rug pulls. This is where developers launch a project, attract investment, and then suddenly disappear, draining all the funds and leaving investors holding worthless tokens.
Just pull the rug out from under everyone.
That's exactly. Losses from these hit nearly $6 billion in early 2025, according to some reports, often shifting towards meme coin projects recently. Tactics like honeypot tokens where you can buy but can't sell are common. Nasty. What else? False giveaways are huge. Fraudsters will impersonate well-known crypto exchanges, projects, or even famous individuals, sometimes using sophisticated deepfake videos.
Deep fakes. Wow.
Yeah, it's getting serious. They promise to double or triple any crypto you send them. Of course, they just steal whatever you send. Deepfake scams alone reportedly caused over $200 million in losses in 2025. Other threats include fraudsters using deepfakes to impersonate employees, using synthetic IDs, running money mule networks, and exploiting flaws in smart contracts or project governance.
So the old adage, if it sounds too good to be true.
It almost certainly is. Key red flags to always watch for: promises of easy, guaranteed high returns, projects with very little detailed documentation or anonymous teams, anyone pressuring you to make decisions quickly, and projects with no verifiable registration or history. Legitimate projects welcome scrutiny. Good advice. Beyond outright scams, what about security weaknesses in the technology itself? Is blockchain truly unhackable?
Nothing is truly unhackable, but well-established blockchains are very secure. However, There are potential security vulnerabilities. One theoretical risk is the 51% attack.
What's that?
If a single entity or coordinated group somehow manages to control more than half, 51% of the network's total computing power in POW or stake value in POS, they could potentially manipulate the blockchain. They might be able to prevent new transactions from confirming or even reverse some recent transactions they made themselves, like double spending.
Could that happen to Bitcoin?
It's extremely difficult and expensive for large, highly distributed networks like Bitcoin because the required computing power is immense. But it has happened to smaller cryptocurrencies with less network security.
Okay. What other vulnerabilities? Smart contract exploits are a huge one, especially on platforms like Ethereum. Smart contracts are just code, and code can have bugs or flaws.
Yeah.
Hackers actively hunt for these flaws to exploit them, often draining millions of dollars from DeFi protocols. And because blockchains are immutable, once a flawed contract is deployed, it's incredibly hard to fix.
So the code flaw is permanent.
Often, yes, unless there are specific upgrade mechanisms built in, which adds complexity. Then there's the human element, private key theft. This isn't a flaw in the blockchain itself, but attackers use phishing emails, malware, fake websites, or social engineering to trick users into revealing their private keys or seed phrases. Once they have those, they have full control of your assets.
Back to protecting that seed phrase.
Always. We also mentioned double spending earlier. While consensus mechanisms are designed to prevent it, sophisticated attackers exploiting network delays or flaws might still attempt it, though it's rare on major chains. And finally, cryptojacking, where attackers secretly use someone else's computer resources, like your laptop or company servers, to mine cryptocurrency without permission, stealing electricity and processing power.
Okay, lots of risks there. We've also seen governments getting more involved. How's the regulatory landscape looking?
It's definitely tightening up, but it's patchy globally. Most focus is currently on regulating crypto products, exchanges, investment funds, stable coins, treating them more like traditional financial assets. Regulations specifically restricting the use of blockchain technology itself are less common, but areas like privacy and data handling are getting scrutiny. It's a moving target.
And a practical challenge we touched on, data storage.
Yeah, as blockchain adoption grows, the sheer amount of data that needs to be stored keeps increasing. For public blockchains, where potentially every participant stores the entire history, this becomes a significant long-term scalability and decentralization challenge. How do you keep it manageable for everyday users to participate?
A problem for the future, perhaps? What about the association with illicit activities? That's always been a criticism.
And it's a valid one, though often overstated relative to illicit use of traditional currencies. But yes, cryptocurrencies, especially early on, were used on darknet markets like the original Silk Road. They have been used for money laundering. One platform called Renbridge was linked to laundering at least $540 million since 2020. And they even used to attempt evasion of economic sanctions, which drew a lot of attention, particularly from Western governments in recent years.
So the anonymity or pseudonymity can be a double-edged sword.
Exactly. And that leads to another shady practice, wash trading.
What's that involve?
This is where an entity essentially trades with itself, being both the buyer and the seller, to create a false impression of high trading volume or to artificially inflate the price of a cryptocurrency. It's illegal in regulated financial markets, but harder to police in parts of the crypto world. A report back in 2019 controversially claimed that something like 95% of the reported Bitcoin trading volume on CoinMarketCap at the time was fake, generated by wash trading on certain exchanges.
95%. That's staggering if true. It really undermines trust.
Absolutely. It's market manipulation, plain and simple.
And finally, a potential risk that seems to cut against the core promise, concentration of power. I thought this was all about decentralization.
It's a paradox and a real systemic risk. Even in supposedly decentralized networks like Bitcoin, there's significant concentration. For instance, studies have shown the top 10,000 Bitcoin addresses control roughly 1/3 of all circulating Bitcoin.
1/3? Wow.
And on the mining side, it's estimated that just 0.01% of miners, likely large mining pool operators, control about 50% of the entire network's computational capacity, hash rate. This level of concentration raises questions about true decentralization and potential points of control or failure.
So not as distributed as the ideal, perhaps. One last area, NFTs and intellectual property. You mentioned NFTs earlier. They prove ownership, right? But what about the actual rights to the art or content?
That's a really tricky area with NFTs and intellectual property IP. Yes, an NFT on a blockchain provides verifiable proof of ownership of the token itself. but that doesn't automatically mean you own the underlying copyright or IP rights to the associated image, music, or whatever.
So buying the NFT doesn't mean I own the Mona Lisa if someone minted it.
Exactly. Someone can mint an NFT of work they don't actually own the rights to. This puts inauthentic data onto the blockchain. And if there's an IP dispute, say someone files a DMCA takedown notice on an NFT marketplace because it infringes their copyright, the marketplace might remove the listing, but they usually can't remove the NFT itself or the linked asset from the decentralized storage or the blockchain. It's still out there.
So the blockchain record persists even if the marketplace listing is gone?
Correct. And crucially, any transfer of actual IP rights when an NFT is sold usually requires a separate legal agreement between the buyer and seller, specifying exactly what rights are being transferred. The NFT purchase alone typically doesn't cover it. It's a complex and evolving legal area.
Wow. Okay, what a journey we've been on. We've covered everything from the absolute basics, decentralized digital money, the blockchain ledger, right through to the nitty-gritty mechanics of mining, consensus, forks, gas.
Explored the huge potential applications across finance and beyond.
And importantly, taken a hard look at the very real risks, the scams, the vulnerabilities, the challenges that come with this powerful, disruptive technology. Hopefully, if you've stuck with us, you've gained a much clearer, much deeper perspective on this whole dynamic field.
Yeah, our real aim here was to give you the knowledge to feel more confident, more informed, to be able to navigate the headlines and the hype with a bit more understanding, especially as these technologies weave themselves more and more into our daily lives.
It really demands both curiosity and a healthy dose of critical thinking.
For sure.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. As we see digital assets and blockchain continue to evolve and integrate, what truly new forms of value might we collectively create or unlock next? And perhaps more importantly, how do we as a society ensure these incredibly powerful tools are actually used wisely, ethically, and ultimately serve the common good for everyone?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Something definitely worth pondering.